When Nice is Killing You. Written by Steve Matuku. Before we begin, let me say this clearly. You don't need to listen to this book in order. You don't need to agree with everything. And you don't need to fix your whole life by the end. This is not a book you rush through. It's a book you return to. You might be listening while driving, or walking, or lying awake after another day of saying yes when you meant no. If at any point you need to pause, that's not resistance. That's your body catching up to truth. Let this book meet you where you are. Preface. Why this book exists. We live in an age of emotional burnout, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes from being available to everyone and present with no one, including yourself. It's the exhaustion of carrying relationships that take more than they give, the fatigue of apologizing for needing rest, and the confusion of mistaking availability for love. For a long time, I believed that lie. My phone was always on. Every call was answered. Every message was returned, no matter the hour. I told myself this was kindness, that this was maturity, that this was love. But slowly, something in me thinned. I wasn't tired because I was busy. I was tired because I was disappearing. Today, my phone stays on silent more often, not because I've grown rude, but because I've grown honest. I return calls when I can show up fully, not as a crisis container and not as an emotional vending machine. And I no longer feel guilty about that. Because I've learned this, being reachable is not the same as being present. Being kind is not the same as being available. And love does not require self-erasure. Across cultures and ages, the same questions keep surfacing. Is it okay to say no? Why do I feel guilty for protecting my peace? Am I being mean, or am I finally clear? These questions often rise in quiet despair. A woman in her 40s once told me she sat crying in her car after hosting her in-laws for the third weekend in a row, afraid that saying no would make her seem ungrateful. A young man admitted he hadn't had a single day to himself in years, always fixing everyone else's crises while neglecting his own. Both thought it was love. What it really was exhaustion wrapped in guilt. This book was written for that moment of recognition. The moment you realize that kindness has started costing you your identity. Boundaries are not walls. They are wisdom. They teach you where you end and others begin. Some relationships will resist them. Some will fall away. And some, the healthy ones, will rise to meet you. This book does not demand drastic decisions. It offers clarity. And clarity changes everything. We are not doing this to become hard. We are doing this to become whole. Introduction. When nice starts costing you. You finally said it. No. Or maybe, I can't keep doing this anymore. You stopped answering the guilt-filled messages. You canceled plans with the person who always needed something. And then it came, not their reaction, but your own voice. Was that too harsh? Did I just become the bad guy? Am I being mean? That hesitation right there is the real cost of being nice. Not just exhaustion, but guilt. The kind that convinces you self-protection is selfish, that clarity is cruelty, and that love must always hurt. But here's the truth. You were trained into this. Some learned early that love had to be earned. Some absorbed the idea that sacrifice was proof of loyalty. Some learned, through pain, that saying no led to punishment or withdrawal. So guilt stepped in and disguised itself as conscience. It told you rest was wrong, that boundaries were rebellion, and that saying no made you unlovable. This book is about unlearning that lie. About breaking the pattern before nice drains your joy, your peace, and your sense of self. As you listen, you'll begin by naming the problem: people-pleasing, exhaustion, quiet resentment. Then comes clarity, what boundaries are and what they are not, why saying less often says more, and why pushback is information, not condemnation. You'll step into the hardest rooms, family, marriage, friendship, work, even faith. And finally, you'll arrive at freedom. Not the loud kind, but the grounded kind. The kind where your body exhales, where your yes means yes, and where your no no longer needs a paragraph. Each chapter ends with reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy, don't answer them now. Let them linger. This is not a book about becoming distant. It's about becoming dignified. You're not mean. You're clear. And that clarity may be the most loving thing you ever give. Part 1. The confusion. Humans are wired for connection. But when belonging becomes tied to compliance, love slowly turns into self-betrayal. Psychology calls this the fawn response, the instinct to please in order to stay safe. No one wakes up unable to say no. It happens gradually, through family expectations, cultural scripts, and survival habits learned early. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that keeping the peace mattered more than keeping yourself. This section dismantles that lie. And once you name it, you can no longer disappear inside it. Chapter 1. When kindness becomes self-betrayal. In this chapter, we're looking at how being nice slowly turns into self-erasure, and why it leaves you exhausted. You're always there. You never say no. You drop what you're doing to help. You're the strong one, the sweet one, the reliable one. But inside, you're drowning, and no one knows. Every time you're about to draw a line, guilt kicks in. You tell yourself it's not that bad, that they need you, that you'll rest later. But later never comes. Someone always needs something, and you keep giving. This isn't kindness anymore. It's self-erasure. And it's breaking you. The lie we've been sold. Many of us were raised to believe that being nice means saying yes. Yes to favors, yes to invitations, yes to things we don't want, can't afford, or emotionally dread. And if we say no, we're told we're cold, rude, difficult, sometimes even unchristian, or un-African. But the truth is simple. Kindness without boundaries is performance. It's a show we put on for approval, while resentment quietly simmers underneath. The hidden wound, fawn mode. Psychologists call this the fawn response. It's how some people respond to threat. Not by fighting and not by fleeing, but by pleasing. You learned to stay safe by being useful. You kept love by being agreeable. You avoided conflict by minimizing your needs. As an adult, this creates confusion. You can't always tell the difference between being good and being gone. Every yes you give that violates your peace is really a quiet no to yourself. A familiar story, Sheila, the always there friend. Sheila was the friend everyone counted on. Relationship breakups. Rent emergencies. Baby showers. Job referrals. She answered every call, often at midnight. She lent money she didn't have. She babysat without being asked. But when Sheila needed help after surgery, she was met with silence. That was the moment she understood something painful. Her kindness wasn't love. It was currency. She had been buying people's approval with her own exhaustion. Here's the warning. If your kindness costs you your mental health, it isn't generosity. It's abandonment of yourself. You were not created to be accessible 24/7. You were not meant to be everyone's emotional emergency room. You don't have to bleed to prove you care. Reclaiming your space. Real kindness isn't about constant availability. It's about intentionality. It says, I care about you, and I care about me too. When you set boundaries, people may not clap. They may be confused, disappointed, or even angry. That's okay. You're not being mean. You're being honest. You're being clear. And clarity is kindness, for both of you. Chapter recap. When kindness turns into chronic self-sacrifice, it stops being healthy and becomes harmful. True kindness requires boundaries. Boundaries don't cancel love, they protect it. They allow you to give from honesty, not exhaustion. Boundary check, reflection prompts. If you're listening while driving or busy, don't answer these now. Let them sit. You can return to them later. When was the last time you said yes but felt a strong no inside? What emotion shows up when you try to say no? Fear, guilt, or shame? Whose approval are you most afraid of losing when you assert yourself? What is one small boundary you could begin practicing this week? Chapter 2. Guilt, the emotion that keeps you trapped. In this chapter, we explore why doing what's good for you often feels wrong, and how to stop letting guilt run your life. You finally said it. I'm not available this weekend. Or maybe, I can't lend you money again. Or the dreaded word, no. And then it came. That sinking feeling. The knot in your chest. The imaginary courtroom in your head. The guilt. You start to second-guess yourself. Was I too harsh? Did I just ruin the relationship? Am I turning into someone cold? What you don't realize is this, that reaction isn't about your no. It's about years of being trained to feel bad for choosing yourself. Guilt as emotional blackmail. Guilt is one of the most effective tools used by people who depend on your compliance. They rarely say it outright. They don't say, "You're bad for having boundaries." Instead, they sigh. Or drop familiar phrases. "After everything I've done for you. You used to be so kind. Wow. You've changed." The words are carefully chosen, just enough to make you feel like the villain in your own life. Suddenly, the boundary you felt proud of starts to feel like betrayal. But guilt isn't always a moral signal. Sometimes, it's nothing more than a survival reflex. The psychology of toxic guilt. Where does this guilt come from? Psychologists trace it back to early conditioning. If you grew up where love depended on behavior, boundaries felt dangerous. If your worth was tied to being the peacemaker, the helper, the fixer, the good one, then guilt became your inner alarm. It whispered, "You're drifting too far from approval." But here's the truth. You weren't drifting away from love. You were drifting closer to freedom. When your nervous system has been wired to equate no with rejection, it panics. Guilt surges. Doubt follows, not because your boundary is wrong, but because it feels unfamiliar. That's not your conscience speaking. That's your childhood. Guilt versus shame. Clinically, guilt and shame are closely linked. Guilt says, "I did something bad." Shame says, "I am bad." When guilt is used to manipulate, it quickly turns into shame. You didn't just say no, you became selfish. You didn't just miss the birthday dinner, you became the bad sister. Once shame enters the picture, boundaries become unbearable. So you cave. You say yes with your mouth, while your soul screams, "Not again." The loop that never ends. The cycle is brutal. You say yes out of guilt. You resent the yes. You burn out. You pull back. They guilt trip you again. And around you go. What keeps you trapped isn't duty. It's fear, the fear of disappointing someone, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of losing approval. You've swallowed the lie that you must choose between kindness and clarity. But true kindness does not require self-abandonment. Healing guilt is a nervous system job. Here's the hopeful truth. Guilt can be rewired. Every time you set a boundary and survive the guilt without undoing it, your brain forms a new pathway. You teach yourself something powerful: "I said no. They were upset. And I'm still okay." This is where emotional freedom begins, not by avoiding guilt, but by standing still when it knocks. Guilt is not always a reason to stop. Often, it's the sign you're finally doing what's right for you. Chapter recap. We've been trained to believe that guilt means we are bad people. In reality, guilt often means we are breaking unhealthy patterns. The goal is not to eliminate guilt. The goal is to stop obeying it. Each time you hold steady through the discomfort, you teach yourself that freedom is possible. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy or driving, don't answer these now. Let them sit. You can return to them later. Who in your life uses guilt to get what they want from you? Can you recall a moment when you felt guilty for setting a clear boundary? Did you reverse it? How did your childhood define being good? Did it include denying your own needs? Chapter 3. The people who benefit from your lack of boundaries. In this chapter, we look at an uncomfortable truth: some people benefit when you stay small, available, and unsure. Let's be honest. Some people in your life don't actually want you to grow. They want you available, predictable, accommodating. Your lack of boundaries wasn't just convenient. It was profitable. Maybe they didn't plan to exploit you. Maybe they genuinely love you. But love without respect becomes entitlement. And entitlement is the perfect soil for boundaries to quietly erode. How they keep you playing the role. Manipulators don't always look like villains. Most of the time, they look familiar. A sweet but guilt-tripping aunt. A stressed-out spouse who can't do it without you. An emotionally needy friend who is always in crisis. They feed on your silence. They thrive when you avoid confrontation. They know your script before you speak. It's fine, I'll handle it. I didn't want to upset anyone. It's okay, I'm just tired. They hear that and think, perfect, they won't say no. The psychology of takers. People sense what you will tolerate in a relationship and adjust their behavior accordingly. When boundaries are unclear, what starts as a request slowly becomes an expectation, then a demand, and eventually resentment when you stop giving. In most relationships, the person who speaks up first sets the tone. If you are the silent sacrificer, others adapt to that role as well. This is how someone becomes a chronic taker. First, they ask. Then, they expect. Then, they demand. And when you finally stop, they blame you. You trained them, too. This part is uncomfortable. If someone always turns to you for money, emotional dumping, or last-minute rescues, it may be because you trained them to. You thought you were being kind, supportive, Christ-like, selfless. But over time, you became the backup plan. The ATM. The therapist. The fixer. The sponge. And here's the turning point. When you finally pull back, you become the problem. They say, you're different now. You're cold. You've changed. They're right. You have changed. You're becoming someone who is no longer their supply. The anger behind entitlement. When you start setting boundaries, some people get angry. Not because you're wrong, but because their free access to you is being threatened. Anger is often a deflection. They make you feel guilty so they don't have to feel responsible. Entitled people confuse access with rights. They believe loving you means owning you. They think their feelings should override your limits. So they sulk. They withdraw. They raise their voices. They call you selfish. This is not love. It's dependence masquerading as closeness. The people who react most strongly to your boundaries are often the ones who benefited most from you not having any. Takers need you confused. Manipulation thrives in fog. The more confused you are, the longer they hold their power. That's why boundary setting often triggers guilt speeches, emotional blackmail, tears, and accusations of being mean, selfish, or ungodly. They want you tangled in your own morality. Because if you stop to ask, am I being unkind, they win. When you start to say no. Here's what usually happens when you begin to hold your ground. Manipulators panic. The entitled push back. But emotionally healthy people adjust. Boundaries don't scare mature people. They actually relieve them. It's only those who are taking advantage, knowingly or not, who protest. So when the protests come, ask yourself this: who am I when I'm no longer rescuing them? Why do they need me tired, small, and constantly available to feel okay? Chapter recap. The people who resist your growth are often the ones who benefited from your lack of it. Not everyone deserves access just because they've always had it. Real love does not require sacrifices that leave you empty and depleted. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy or driving, let these questions sit. You can return to them later. Who in your life resists your boundaries the most? What do they lose when you pull back? Have you ever felt used by someone you love but struggled to admit it? What would it look like to love someone without rescuing them every time? Chapter 4. When you say yes but mean no. In this chapter, we step into the quiet pain of people-pleasing and the resentment it leaves behind. You said yes. You even smiled. But inside, something clenched. Your chest tightened. Your stomach turned. You knew it in that moment, you were betraying yourself. But it felt safer than disappointing someone else. That is the everyday agony of people-pleasing. Not because you are weak, but because you were taught that being liked is safer than being honest. This chapter is about the quiet war between the yes on your lips and the no in your soul. Why it feels so risky to say no. There is a story you carry. Maybe it came from childhood. Maybe from early relationships. A story that shaped your belief. If I say no, I'll be punished. If I say no, I'll lose connection. If I say no, I'll be rejected. So you say yes. Even when you're exhausted, even when you disagree, even when your plate is already full. Each time, you chip away at your own peace to protect someone else's feelings. This isn't kindness. It's survival disguised as generosity. The psychology of people-pleasing. Psychologist Harriet Breker called this pattern the disease to please. It often grows out of childhood environments where love and approval were conditional. You were praised when you were helpful. You were shamed when you had needs. You were safest when you were agreeable. Over time, you learned something quietly: my worth is in what I do for others, not in who I am. So as an adult, you default to yes, not because you want to, but because you're afraid not to. What your yes actually costs. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you abandon yourself. The cost doesn't show up immediately. But it accumulates. You grow resentful. You start keeping score, emotionally, physically, relationally. On the outside, people see dependability. On the inside, you're drowning in invisible obligations. You become irritable. Passive-aggressive. Disconnected. But you still smile, because you were raised to perform peace instead of practicing honesty. Every no you swallow for them is a no you're saying to yourself. The lies we tell ourselves. To justify chronic yesing, we tell ourselves small lies. It's just this once. They need me more than I need rest. It's not a big deal. But it is a big deal. Each swallowed no moves you closer to self-erasure. You don't disappear all at once. You fade, in pieces. Resentment, the hidden alarm. Resentment is not pettiness. It's an alarm. It rings when you overgive, when you overextend, when you tolerate what you shouldn't. And because you never voiced your limits, you start believing that people are taking advantage of you. Here is the hard truth: people often follow the rules you teach them. And silence teaches them that your limits don't matter. Why clarity feels like cruelty, but isn't. If you've spent your life sugarcoating your feelings, directness will feel harsh to your ears. Saying, "I can't do that today," will sound aggressive, not because it is, but because you were conditioned to value harmony over honesty. Clarity isn't cruelty. It's kindness with a backbone. Practicing a new kind of courage. The next time someone asks you for something, pause. Ask yourself 2 questions. If I say yes, will I mean it? If I say no, will I survive their disappointment? You will. Disappointment is not death. But resentment? That rots the soul. Chapter recap. People-pleasing is not a virtue. It is an adaptation, a survival strategy rooted in fear, not freedom. Saying yes when you mean no isn't loving. It's dishonest. And the person you lie to most often is yourself. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while driving or doing something else, don't answer these now. Let them sit. You can return to them later. When was the last time you said yes but meant no? Why did you do it? Who are you most afraid to disappoint? What do you fear would happen if you did? What would it look like to offer honest yes and guilt-free no's? Part 2. The clarity. Defining what boundaries are, and what they are not. Neuroscience tells us something important: clarity calms the mind. When your limits are vague, your brain stays on high alert. It keeps scanning for danger, for disappointment, for conflict. But when boundaries are clear, something shifts. You know what's okay. Others know what's okay. The chaos quiets. Your body exhales. Now that you've seen the problem, it's time to dismantle the lies and rebuild the truth. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out. They are doors, doors with hinges, doors with locks, doors with handles. You decide when they open. You decide when they close. You decide who is welcome inside. This section strips away the guilt that clings to boundaries and replaces it with understanding. You'll learn how to be firm without becoming bitter, how to stop over-explaining what does not need justification, and how to hold your ground when pushback comes, because it will come. If Part 1 showed you why you've been drowning, Part 2 places the life raft in your hands. And for the first time, you'll realize you were never weak. You were just unclear. Chapter 5. What boundaries actually are, and what they're not. In this chapter, we define boundaries clearly, calmly, and truthfully, without guilt, drama, or distortion. The confusion around boundaries. When people hear the word boundaries, they often picture drama, a slammed door, a blocked number, a fiery message that ends a relationship. That is not a boundary. That is a reaction. And reaction is what happens when boundaries have been ignored for far too long. Real boundaries are not loud. They are not threats. They are not punishments. They are personal truths with consequences. Think of boundaries as the rules of engagement for being in relationship with you. They define what is okay and what is not. What builds trust and what breaks it. Boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about containing yourself, your time, your energy, and your well-being. The psychology behind it. Henry Cloud and John Townsend describe boundaries as the invisible property lines of the soul. Psychologists see them as the foundation of emotional regulation, agency, and identity. Without boundaries, you lose yourself trying to hold everyone else together. So why do so many people struggle to set them? Childhood wiring. Many of us were taught early on, be a good boy, be a good girl, don't upset anyone, sacrifice for others. Over time, boundaries began to feel mean, selfish, or unnecessary. But neuroscience tells a different story. Healthy boundaries lower cortisol, the stress hormone, and increase your sense of safety. Boundaries are not selfish. They are stabilizing. What boundaries are not? Let's clear the air. Boundaries are not ultimatums, do this or I'm done. They are not walls of punishment. They are not excuses to be cold, avoidant, or dismissive. And they are not weapons used to win arguments. Boundaries are responsibility. You taking responsibility for your space, your energy, your time, and your peace. A boundary sounds like this. I'm happy to talk, when we can do it respectfully. I don't lend money to friends. I won't continue this conversation if it becomes disrespectful. I love you, but I can't be your therapist. No drama. No threat. Just clarity. What boundaries actually are. Boundaries are self-honoring decisions. They are clarity tools for relationships. They protect your peace. They give structure to how others engage with you. They allow your yes to mean yes, and your no to be trusted. Boundaries also give others freedom. They get to decide whether they are willing to stay within your fence or walk away. And you? You get to stop micromanaging, stop begging, stop over-explaining, and stop resenting. You return to peace. Why some people hate your boundaries? The reason is simple: they benefited from your lack of them. Your absence of limits made them comfortable. Your exhaustion served their convenience. So when you change the rules, they will test them. They may say, "You've changed. You're being cold. What happened to you?" Here's what happened. You started telling the truth. Chapter recap. Boundaries are not threats. They are personal truths with consequences. They are not about control, they are about self-protection. While childhood conditioning may make boundaries feel harsh, neuroscience shows they reduce stress and strengthen relationships. And when people push back, that resistance is often proof that boundaries were long overdue. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy or on the move, let these questions sit. You can return to them later. What boundary have you avoided setting because you don't want to seem mean? Who benefits from your current lack of boundaries, and at what cost to you? What does it look like to set a boundary with clarity, not hostility? Which phrase from this chapter can you begin using in real life? Chapter 6. Boundaries without bitterness. In this chapter, we explore how to be clear, firm, and kind, without turning cold or cutting everyone off. The fear of becoming that person. You've started setting boundaries. You're saying no. You're protecting your peace. And then the whisper comes. Have I become hard? Am I losing my warmth? Is this healthy? Or am I just angry? This is where many people hesitate. They begin to confuse boundaries with bitterness, distance with detachment, and clarity with cruelty. Here's the truth: you do not have to lose your kindness to reclaim your life. You only have to stop giving kindness to people who weaponize it. The psychology of clean boundaries. Clinical psychology teaches something grounding: boundary setting itself is a neutral act. The tone does not come from the boundary. It comes from your inner state. When limits are set from exhaustion, they sound sharp. When they come from revenge, they carry heat. But when they are grounded in self-awareness and wholeness, they come out steady, calm, and firm. Research shows that emotional dysregulation, resentment, fear, people-pleasing, can make boundary setting feel like war. But you are not at war. You are simply done bleeding. Grace and grit can coexist. You can say no with kindness. You can create space with respect. You can withdraw from chaos without announcing someone's toxicity to the world. This is not about cruelty. It's about clarity. It's not about making others feel small. It's about making yourself feel safe. A graceful boundary might sound like this. This dynamic has been tough for me. I need some space to process. I love you, but I can't continue this pattern. Let's reconnect when it feels more mutual. No drama. No blame. No explanation marathon. Just truth, spoken calmly. What bitterness looks like in disguise. Bitterness often hides. It shows up as sarcasm that stings, silence that punishes, or distance that avoids honesty. It leaks out through oversharing your hurt with people who were never meant to carry it. It lives in rehearsed conversations that never actually happen. Bitterness keeps you tied to the pain. Boundaries release you from it. You are not mean because you pulled back. You are not cold because you stopped explaining. You are clear, and clarity is what healing sounds like. Chapter recap. Boundaries are not about anger. They are about alignment. Bitterness is unprocessed pain. Boundaries are intentional clarity. You can hold limits with respect, even in difficult situations. Graceful language matters, and sometimes silence itself is a clean boundary. If you feel guilty for being clear, that guilt is usually a remnant of old conditioning, not evidence that you are doing something wrong. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy or on the move, let these questions sit. You can return to them later. In what areas do you fear coming across as cold when you try to be clear? Have you been setting boundaries from resentment, or from wholeness? What is one sentence you can practice that is both firm and kind? Who has modeled clear but kind boundaries in your life, and what can you learn from them? Chapter 7. The power of saying less, not more. In this chapter, we explore why over-explaining weakens your boundaries, and why fewer words often carry more strength. Why we over-explain. You say no. And then you keep talking. I'm sorry, I just have a lot going on right now. I hope that's okay with you. I didn't mean to sound harsh. I really wish I could help. Maybe next time. That wasn't a boundary. That was a performance. When you find yourself explaining and re-explaining, one thing is usually happening. You are still trying to manage the other person's emotions. You feel guilty for disappointing them. You've been conditioned to believe your needs require permission. And somewhere deep inside, you've learned to associate assertiveness with rejection or conflict. At the core of over-explaining is a simple fear: if I'm honest, they will love me less. The psychology behind over-explaining. Psychologically, over-explaining is often a trauma response. It's called fawning. A quieter cousin of fight, flight, or freeze. Fawning is the urge to over-accommodate in order to stay safe, to keep the peace, and to avoid abandonment. In childhood, it may have looked like becoming the good child to avoid being yelled at, taking care of a parent's emotions to keep the home calm, or minimizing your needs so you wouldn't be a burden. As an adult, it sounds like this: if I explain myself well enough, maybe they won't be mad. If I soften the no with a long story, maybe they'll still like me. But here is the truth. Boundaries are not negotiations. They are declarations. The strength of fewer words. Sometimes the most powerful sentence is simple: that doesn't work for me. You don't owe a paragraph. You don't need a spreadsheet of reasons. You don't have to invite people into the courtroom of your decision. Silence can be a boundary, too. And often, the people who demand long explanations are not seeking understanding, they are struggling with control. What happens when you say less? At first, saying less will feel uncomfortable. You may feel cold. You may feel rude. You may feel like you haven't given enough context. That discomfort is familiar. It's the feeling of not performing. But over time, something else replaces it: peace. Here's what begins to happen. People who respect you continue to. People who don't push back harder. You begin detoxing from the need to be endlessly understood. You become emotionally lighter. Saying less is not shutting down. It's shutting out the noise. Chapter recap. Over-explaining usually grows out of fear: fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of losing love. It is rooted in the fawn response, where over-accommodation feels like safety. But boundaries do not require courtroom defenses. They require clarity. And sometimes, the healthiest boundary you can set is the quiet strength of fewer words. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while driving or doing something else, let these questions sit. You can return to them later. Who in your life expects long explanations when you say no? When you over-explain, what fear are you really trying to soothe? What is one situation where you could respond with a calm, simple sentence? How would your life feel if you no longer had to over-explain your boundaries? Chapter 8. When the pushback comes. In this chapter, we look at what happens when you start saying no, and other people don't like it. The backlash is real. You said no. You finally spoke up. You declined the invite, skipped the favor, or drew a line in the sand. And then it came, a guilt-tripping text, a passive-aggressive silence, a dramatic outburst, or worse, complete withdrawal. It stings. Especially when you hoped they would understand. But here is the hard truth, the first boundary you set with someone often reveals the real relationship. Why people react badly to boundaries. Your boundary did not create the drama. It revealed what was already broken. People push back against boundaries for a few common reasons. They benefited from your lack of limits. They felt entitled to your time or energy. They confused your availability with their sense of worth or control. Or your no-triggered abandonment wounds they never healed. Your boundary threatens a system they grew comfortable with. And change always feels like loss, even when the change is fair. The types of pushback you might face. Some reactions are subtle. Others are loud. Most fall into familiar patterns. There are guilt trips. After everything I've done for you. You've really changed. I guess I know where I stand now. What they're really saying is simple, I don't like not getting my way. There is silence or ghosting. They disappear, stop calling, or ignore your messages. This isn't maturity. It's punishment, an attempt to pressure you back into compliance. There are outbursts or tantrums. Raised voices, tears, accusations, and theatrics. The message underneath is clear, if I overwhelm you emotionally, maybe you'll back down. And then there is manipulation disguised as concern. I'm just worried about you. This doesn't seem like you. Are you okay? Translation. Your growth threatens my control, so I'll frame it as care. How to respond without reverting. This is the hardest part, the pull to explain, to backpedal, to soften the boundary. Resist it. Your job is not to fix their discomfort. Your job is to stay grounded. Pause. Breathe. If needed, repeat your boundary calmly, I understand you're upset. My decision still stands. You do not need to apologize for being clear. And if someone becomes emotionally unsafe, you are allowed to create distance. Distance is not punishment. It is protection. What pushback really is. Their reaction is not a reflection of your worth. It is information, data. It tells you something about the relationship, about what was expected of you, and about what you were allowed to be. Let it teach you. But do not let it define you. Chapter recap. Pushback is normal. It reveals who respected you, and who only benefited from you. Emotional backlash usually comes from entitlement, not love. Boundaries don't create dysfunction, they unmask it. The work is not to explain more or perform better. The work is to stay grounded and remember this, their discomfort is not your responsibility to resolve. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy, let these questions rest. You can return to them later. Who in your life reacts the strongest when you set a boundary? What emotion do you feel most when someone pushes back, guilt, fear, or sadness? What would it look like to stay firm without becoming cold? What lesson might this pushback be teaching you about the relationship? Part 3. The confrontation. In this section, we step into the moments where boundaries are tested under pressure. Research on social dynamics reveals something sobering: the closer the relationship, the greater the resistance to change. When you set new boundaries, people often test them, not consciously, but instinctively. They wait. They push. They hope the old version of you will return. That is why confrontation feels so personal. It is one thing to understand boundaries in theory. It is another to practice them where they matter most. This section moves into the high-pressure rooms: family, marriage, dating, friendships, work, and even church. These are the spaces where love, loyalty, and expectation collide. Where saying no can feel like betrayal. Here, you will learn how to hold your ground under cultural pressure. How to recognize emotional manipulation without demonizing the person. And how to face the fear of disappointing people you genuinely care about. The conversations ahead will not be easy. But confrontation is not always conflict. Sometimes it is the very thing that saves the relationship. And sometimes, it is what saves you from disappearing inside it. Chapter 9. Boundaries with family, when blood isn't enough. In this chapter, we step into one of the most sensitive spaces of all: family. The most sacred, and the most complicated. Family is where most of us first learned what love looks like. It is also where many of us first learned to silence ourselves, to suppress our needs, carry guilt, perform for affection, and keep the peace at any cost. That is why setting boundaries with family can feel like betrayal. We were taught that love equals access, and that belonging means availability. But here is the truth: love without boundaries is not love. More often, it is silent obligation disguised as loyalty. Why family boundaries are the hardest. This runs deep. Psychologically, your brain is wired to seek approval from those who raised you. Even when they hurt you, the bond does not snap. It bends. It turns into rationalizations. They did their best. It's not that bad. They're just old school. But those explanations do not heal wounds. They bury them. That is why boundaries with family feel heavier than boundaries anywhere else. They do not just challenge relationships. They challenge identity. What unhealthy family patterns sound like. Sometimes the pressure is loud. Sometimes it sounds normal. You're always too busy for us now. Why don't you ever call anymore? That's just how your father is, don't start drama. Family comes first. Always. These statements are not always malicious. But they are invalidating. They frame your limits as disrespect, when in reality those limits are the path to wholeness. A familiar story. Angela grew up in a close, loving household. Her mother was kind, but emotionally enmeshed. Every time Angela tried to step into her own life, to move, to travel, or to choose for herself, her mother collapsed into guilt. Maybe I should die, then you can be free. Angela stayed for years. Not out of love, but out of obligation. Therapy eventually gave her language for what was happening: emotional blackmail. Naming it was the beginning of her healing. Boundaries do not mean you cut everyone off. Setting boundaries with family does not mean abandonment. It means choice. It looks like deciding how long you stay on the phone. Choosing how often you visit. Refusing to be the fixer, the rescuer, or the secret keeper. Boundaries do not dishonor your roots. They protect your right to grow beyond them. When culture or faith makes it harder. Not everyone can walk away. In many cultures, African, Asian, Latin, family is not just family. It is community, survival, and reputation. Distance can feel like exile. So you start where you can. You set boundaries around time, money, and sensitive topics. You speak firmly, but respectfully. You create emotional distance when physical distance is not possible. And you use simple language. That doesn't work for me. I'm not available for that. Boundaries do not always sever ties. Sometimes they reshape the relationship. They allow you to honor your values without losing yourself. Chapter recap. Family can be sacred, and it can be complicated. Love can coexist with manipulation, control, or emotional pressure. Boundaries do not erase family, they redefine the terms of connection. You can care deeply and still protect yourself. You can honor your roots without sacrificing your growth. Boundaries are not rejection. They are redefinition. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy, let these questions rest. You can return to them later. What roles were you assigned in your family: peacemaker, fixer, scapegoat? What do you feel most guilty about when you say no to relatives? Who in your family respects your boundaries, and who consistently ignores them? What is one boundary you could enforce today without over-explaining? Chapter 10. Boundaries in Marriage and Dating. In this chapter, we look at what love actually requires, and what it does not. When love gets blurry. Boundaries are easy to talk about until you fall in love. Romantic relationships blur everything. The line between giving and overgiving, the space between healthy compromise and quiet resentment, and the difference between supporting someone and slowly erasing yourself. It often starts with a good intention: I just want them to be happy. And then, one day, you realize something painful. You're not happy. You're overextended, emotionally drained, and running on empty. Love should never cost you your identity. But without boundaries, it often does. Why romance makes boundaries feel wrong. Romantic bonds reach deep. They stir the need to be chosen, the fear of abandonment, and the echoes of early attachment. So you bend. You avoid conflict. You silence your needs to keep the peace. That is not kindness. That is survival disguised as love. The martyr mentality. In marriage and dating, this pattern often shows up quietly. The wife who carries everyone's emotional weight. The boyfriend who never admits when he's hurt. The partner who says yes to everything, hoping love alone will be enough. You become the emotional janitor, cleaning up messes you didn't make and calling it commitment. But a relationship without boundaries becomes a lopsided contract. One gives. The other takes. And resentment grows quietly until it bursts, or slowly eats away at the bond. A familiar story. Sandra loved her husband deeply. But over time, she stopped asking for anything. He chose the car, the house, and the weekend plans. Whenever she spoke up, he brushed it off. You're overthinking. So she stopped speaking. He wasn't abusive. He wasn't cruel. But her voice disappeared. Years later, in therapy, she whispered something heartbreaking: I don't even know what I want anymore. Her husband was stunned. But the truth was simple. She had trained him not to hear her. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors with locks. In marriage and dating, boundaries do not shut your partner out. They invite them in. On healthy terms. A boundary might sound like this: I need alone time to recharge. I'm not okay with that tone. Let's revisit this when we're calmer. I love you, but I can't say yes to that. A partner who loves you will lean in with curiosity. A partner who needs control will resent your clarity. Why boundaries create safety. Without boundaries, relationships swing to extremes, too much merging or too much distance. Boundaries restore balance. They teach one partner that closeness does not require self-erasure. They teach the other that connection does not require escape. Boundaries do not create distance. They create safety. And safety is what allows love to last. The cultural weight. In many cultures, marriage is seen as merging. Two people become one. Boundaries can feel like disloyalty. But in reality, they protect the relationship. They guard against codependence, preserve individuality, and keep desire alive. In communities where separation is taboo, boundaries may be the very thing that keeps a relationship healthy enough to survive. Chapter Recap. Love without boundaries does not deepen intimacy. It breeds quiet resentment. Real intimacy requires limits as much as affection. A healthy partner doesn't just know your love language, they respect your limits. Boundaries are not barriers to connection. They are the framework that keeps love alive for the long run. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy, let these questions rest. You can return to them later. What patterns from past relationships have you repeated, even when they drained you? What boundary do you fear voicing most in your current relationship, and why? Do you say yes when you mean no to avoid conflict or rejection? How would you love differently if you believed your needs deserve to be heard? Chapter 11. Friendship or emotional leeching. In this chapter, we look at friendships that quietly drain your energy, and how to reset them without guilt or drama. When friendship feels like a full-time job. Friendship should feel safe, mutual, and uplifting. But sometimes it starts to feel like emotional babysitting. You are always listening, but never heard. You are the emergency contact, yet they disappear when you need support. You carry their chaos, but they cannot hold your truth. That is not friendship. That is emotional leeching. And when it is never named, it usually never stops, because leeches rarely feel the need to pull away on their own. Why we stay in draining friendships. Toxic friendships do not always look toxic. They hide behind history, we've been friends for 15 years. They hide behind guilt, she's going through a lot right now. And they hide behind fear, what if no one else gets me? But staying in one-sided relationships does something quietly harmful. It lowers your expectations. It teaches you to settle. And it teaches the other person that they do not have to give more. A familiar story. Nicole was known as the therapist friend. Everyone came to her when life was falling apart. But when she reached out, there was silence. Once, in the middle of her own crisis, she sent a message, "I'm not okay." The reply was a single emoji. No follow-up. No check-in. No care. That was her wake-up call. She began asking herself one question. Would I feel safe crying in front of this person? For most of her circle, the answer was no. She did not hate them. She simply reassigned roles, and reallocated her energy. When friendship is actually a trauma bond. Sometimes what we call friendship is something else entirely, a trauma bond. These relationships feed on pain, not growth. They thrive in crisis and wither in calm. They recycle the same drama over and over. Trauma bonds can feel intense. But intensity is not the same as safety. These relationships require healing, boundaries, or both. Signs you need a friendship boundary. Your body often knows before your mind does. You dread their calls because you know it will be another vent session. You feel lighter when plans are cancelled. You cannot remember the last time they asked how you were. You hear yourself saying, "It's fine," when it isn't, just to keep the peace. You know you have outgrown the friendship, but guilt keeps you tethered. Friendship should nourish, not drain. It should challenge, not consume. It should grow with you, not guilt-trip you. When you can't just cut them off. Sometimes walking away is not realistic. In tight-knit communities, family systems, church groups, work circles, friendships overlap with daily life. Disappearing may not be possible. But resetting expectations is. You stop oversharing with people who cannot hold your heart. You say, "Not today," to draining conversations without apology. You refuse to play fixer in friendships that refuse to change. You are not obligated to offer your presence to anyone who ignores your personhood. What healthy friendship sounds like. Healthy boundaries do not sound cruel. They sound clear. I can't carry this for you, but I can sit with you. I need a break from this conversation, it's been heavy. I love you, but I'm not your therapist. Let's talk about something lighter today. How are you doing? If this pattern doesn't change, I'll need to step back. Real friends adjust. Users accuse. Chapter recap. Friendships without boundaries turn into unpaid therapy sessions. Trauma bonds can masquerade as loyalty, but they keep you stuck. Boundaries do not require dramatic exits, they require pruning. Cutting back what is unhealthy allows what is good to grow. Friendship should never cost your peace. When it does, it is time to reset the terms, or release the tie. Reflection prompts. If you are listening while busy, let these questions sit. You can return to them later. Which of your friendships leave you feeling drained or unheard? Do you confuse loyalty with emotional labor? What boundary could you set this week to protect your peace without drama? How would your life change if you prioritized friendships that give as much as they take? Chapter 12. Boundaries at Work and Church. In this chapter, we examine how service can quietly slide into self-neglect. And how to push back with clarity and grace. When giving becomes exploitation. You were taught to work hard. You were raised to serve. But somewhere along the way, you forgot how to say no. Now you're carrying burnout. You say yes to things that drain you. You feel guilty for wanting to breathe. And when this happens in church, the guilt doubles, because service is supposed to be sacred, yet somehow it feels soul-crushing. The double bind of duty. In both the workplace and the church, an unspoken rule often operates: if you're good at something, you'll be asked to do it forever. You're praised for staying late. Rewarded for saying yes without hesitation. Commended for never asking whether it's sustainable. Slowly, something shifts. People begin valuing your function more than your well-being. And you begin confusing self-abandonment with loyalty. A familiar story. Janet became the go-to person at her church. Administration, music, decor, counseling prep, even babysitting during retreats. She handled it all. Every Sunday, people told her, "We're so grateful for you." But no one ever asked, "How are you?" One Saturday evening, Janet sat in her car and broke down. She cried until her chest hurt. And then she still showed up the next morning. The guilt of saying no felt heavier than her exhaustion. It took a health scare to stop her. Only then did her church say, "Take care of you first." That was the moment Janet realized something important. God never asked her to die on every hill. Only one person did that, and he already rose. When identity fuses with role. In many work and faith environments, a subtle fusion happens. You don't just help, you become the helper. You don't just work, you become the workhorse. Worth becomes output. Belonging becomes obedience. Identity becomes availability. When worth is tied to productivity, people begin hustling for their value. Stepping out of that mindset is not selfish. It is healthy. And it is the only way to live whole. How to set boundaries without burning bridges. Boundaries at work and church do not need to be dramatic. They need to be clear. They might sound like this: "I'm honored you asked, but I need to pass this time. I'd love to help, what can I set aside from my current load to make room? I can give 2 hours this weekend, not the whole day. My family and rest are priorities right now. I can't take this on. Let me think about it and get back to you." No is a complete sentence. And not now is just as valid. Chapter recap. When people depend on you more than they should, it is not always a compliment. Sometimes it is a signal that you have carried too much. Overserving is not holiness. It is a boundary problem. Saying no does not make you selfish. It makes you a wise steward of your soul. Healthy service honors both the giver and the gift. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy, let these questions sit. You can return to them later. Where in your work or church life do you feel overextended or exploited? What do you fear will happen if you say no: rejection, guilt, or disapproval? If you gave yourself permission to prioritize rest, what would change? What would it look like to serve with boundaries, not burnout? Part 4, The Freedom. This is the aftermath, what comes after the boundaries, the guilt, the pushback, and the hard conversations. It is what remains when the noise fades. Research on self-determination offers something hopeful. Autonomy, the ability to choose your own path, is one of the strongest drivers of human happiness. Boundaries are how that autonomy takes shape in everyday life. This is the turning point. You have walked through discomfort, faced resistance, and held your ground. Along the way, you redefined what love means to you, and what kindness looks like when it includes yourself. Now something shifts. This final section is about what happens after the dust settles. It is about the peace that quiets your body, the self-respect that anchors your choices, and the clarity that remains when weak connections fall away and strong ones stay. You begin to notice who rises to meet your new standard. Who adjusts, who listens, who respects you more now that you respect yourself. And slowly, almost quietly, you become something new, the safe person you once needed. Freedom, you discover, is not loud. It does not perform, argue, or explain itself. Freedom is calm, grounded, and unapologetic. And it is yours. Chapter 13. You're not mean. You're just finally clear. In this chapter, we name what clarity really does to your soul, your identity, and your healing. When you finally draw the line. It doesn't feel rebellious. It doesn't feel selfish. It doesn't feel dramatic. It just feels quiet. You're not shouting. You're not explaining. You're not apologizing. You're simply clear. After years of second-guessing, over-explaining, and performing for approval, something shifts. You stop trying to convince people you're still nice. You stop auditioning for belonging. You begin living a life that is no longer up for negotiation. The emotional fallout of clarity. Clarity doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives with silence. An awkward pause in the group chat. A friend saying, "You've changed." A sibling joking, "You're distant these days." A leader quietly disappointed that you didn't volunteer again. This can feel unsettling. But here is what matters. Conflict is not wrongdoing. Discomfort is not cruelty. Peace often comes after clarity, not before it. The shift that happens inside you. Something internal begins to rearrange. You stop measuring yourself by other people's reactions. You realize you can hold two things at once. I can love you and still say no. I can respect you and still disagree. I can stay grounded even if you are upset. This is not rebellion. This is emotional adulthood. It is the moment you become self-defined instead of approval-defined. What clarity unlocks. When you stop people-pleasing, you start soul-keeping. You sleep better. You dread less. You hear yourself again. Rooms that once drained you feel quieter. You begin to trust your body. Your yes becomes honest. Your no becomes clean. And you realize something essential. You do not owe everyone unlimited access. You do not owe anyone a diluted version of yourself. Clarity becomes the gatekeeper of your peace. And peace is not a luxury. It is your birthright. Chapter recap. Clarity is not cruelty. It is honesty. The fallout of boundaries can be uncomfortable. But so is living a life where you disappear. Boundaries sharpen your values. Protect your identity. Safeguard your capacity. The people who truly love you will adjust. The rest will adjust to your silence. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy, let these questions rest. You can return to them later. What relationships shifted when you began getting clear about your needs? Do you still confuse clarity with meanness? Why? What part of you has come alive because you said no to what drained you? How can you stay anchored when others respond poorly to your clarity? Chapter 14. Relationships that survive boundaries. In this chapter, we look at the people who stay, who grow, and who respect your new standard. Not everyone leaves. When you finally draw the line, some people walk away. That part hurts. But here is the part most people don't expect. Some don't leave. Some stay. Some adjust. Some grow because you grew. They may stumble at first. They may flinch at the new tone in your no. But they come around, not because you bent backward, but because you finally stood tall. Why secure relationships adapt? Healthy relationships are not built on comfort. They are built on respect. People who are emotionally secure may feel unsettled when someone they love sets a new boundary. But they adapt. Because real connection does not require control. If someone only loves the version of you who is endlessly agreeable, they do not love you. They love your performance. But when someone stays through your growth, that is real relationship. What safety looks like. Safe people behave differently. They ask instead of assume. They give you space to respond. They do not punish you with guilt. They may push, but when you say, "That's too far," they listen. They are not perfect. But they are willing to grow with you. And that willingness is what makes them safe. Don't miss the ones who stayed. It is easy to fixate on the ones who left. To replay the loss. To grieve the absence. But do not overlook the quiet faithfulness of the ones who stayed. The friend who didn't make a fuss. The partner who said, "I get it. Do what you need." The sibling who adjusted, even though it stung. These are the keepers. Do not mourn the old crowd so loudly that you miss the beauty of those who chose to remain. Conversations worth having. Boundaries do not mean silence. The healthiest relationships are strengthened by honest acknowledgement. I know this boundary was new. Thank you for respecting it. It meant a lot that you didn't guilt me. I feel safe being honest with you. When you name safety, you reinforce it. When you honor maturity, you invite more of it. What you affirm, you strengthen. The quiet gift of growing together. Boundaries do not only filter people out. They also filter people in. When you are honest, you repel control and attract courage. When you are clear, you repel manipulation and attract maturity. Some relationships rise. Some deepen. Some finally bloom because you stopped hiding your needs. That is the hidden gift of boundaries. They do not just protect you. They reveal who is truly safe. Chapter recap. Boundaries do more than expose weak connections. They reveal the strongest ones. Secure, loving people may struggle at first. But they adapt, because respect runs deeper than comfort. Do not miss the ones who stayed. Do not hesitate to affirm them. Boundaries do not end love. They refine it. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy, let these questions rest. You can return to them later. Who surprised you by respecting your boundaries? What old relationship wounds still make you suspicious of good people? How can you deepen the relationships that grew stronger after you became clear? Are you fully acknowledging the people who adapted to the healthier version of you? Chapter 15. Becoming the safe person you needed. In this chapter, we arrive at the deeper work, how healthy boundaries do not just protect you, but transform you into someone others feel safe with. The wound beneath the wall. Let's be honest. Most people did not start setting boundaries because life was going well. They did it after being burned. After feeling invisible. After giving until there was nothing left. After discovering that even their best was not enough. So they built walls, not because they hated people, but because they never felt safe with them. Here is the shift most people miss. Boundaries are not only about keeping danger out. They are about becoming the kind of person who is safe to be close to. How healing changes the pattern. People who grow up without safety often recreate unsafe dynamics as adults. They overgive. They tolerate chaos. Or they withdraw completely. Boundaries interrupt that cycle. As healing takes root, something changes. You stop parenting from fear. You stop managing friendships like survival drills. You stop projecting old wounds onto new people. Instead, you become a grounded presence, steady, predictable, emotionally available, without being consumable. You become the presence your younger self always needed. From rescuer to respecter. Before, you rushed in. You fixed. You soothed. You absorbed weight that was never yours to carry. Now, you pause. You ask. You wait. You allow others to carry what belongs to them. This is not coldness. It is safety. Because safety does not always say yes. Safety says, here is where I end. And here is where you begin. And I respect both. What safe people actually do. Safe people are not flawless. They are consistent. They do not overpromise. They do not disappear when things get uncomfortable. They own their mistakes instead of turning others into villains. They listen, and they know when to step back. They can hear a no without collapsing. They are honest with themselves and with others. That honesty is what makes them safe. From survival mode to sacred space. In survival mode, you hid your needs. Or you exploded with resentment when they were ignored. Now, you speak earlier. You speak clearly. You speak kindly. You are no longer managing chaos. You are creating space. A space where truth can exist, where respect is expected, where love is not earned through exhaustion. This is not rigidity. It is sacred space. You become the example. Every healthy boundary you set teaches something. Your children are watching. Your friends are learning. Your partner may resist at first, but clarity teaches faster than explanation ever could. The safest people are not the ones who bend until they break. They are the ones who teach others how to stand, with grace. Chapter Recap. Becoming safe means healing your own chaos, not just avoiding other people's. Secure people are not perfect. They are clear. They are honest. They are consistent. Your boundaries do more than protect you. They teach others what safety looks like. Safety is not found in people-pleasing. It is found in maturity. In the end, you do not just set boundaries. You become one. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy, let these questions rest. You can return to them later. Who was the safest person you ever knew, and what did they do that made you feel secure? Where do you still operate from survival mode, and how does that shape your relationships? In what ways have you become safer to be around since you began healing? What would it look like to become a sacred space, for yourself, and for others? Chapter 16. This is what freedom feels like. In this final chapter, we name what happens when you reclaim your life and stop apologizing for being whole. The fire is out. You are no longer walking on edge. No longer carrying the weight of everyone else's emotions. No longer spinning in guilt every time you say no. No longer burning yourself to keep others warm. The fire is out. And what remains is peace. This, right here, is what freedom feels like. When the body finally calms. Many people live in a state of quiet bracing. Always rehearsing responses. Always scanning for tension. Always performing peace instead of living it. Boundaries interrupt that pattern. They soothe the nervous system. They teach the body that it no longer has to prepare for impact. You stop over-explaining. You stop replaying conversations in your head. You stop asking, was I too harsh, every time you speak clearly. And you begin to feel something new. Relief. You are free. Free from performance. Free from self-abandonment. Free to love without losing yourself. What you no longer tolerate. Before boundaries, your life sounded like this. You answered calls you dreaded. You let guilt write your calendar. You accepted apologies that changed nothing. You stayed silent to keep the peace. Now something is different. You value your time. You honor your energy. You pause before reacting. You say, I'm not available for that. And you mean it. What freedom is, and isn't. Freedom is not perfection. Old patterns may still whisper. You may still feel the pull to overgive or stay quiet. But now, you catch it sooner. You correct course faster. Freedom is not a destination. It is a posture. It is showing up whole, unapologetic, rooted, honest. It is choosing clarity again and again, even when it feels unfamiliar. The quiet ripple effect. This freedom does not stop with you. It spreads. Your children learn what emotional health looks like. Your future self carries less regret. Your relationships become cleaner and more honest. Your community receives a clearer version of you. The one not buried under obligation. Not muffled by guilt. Not diluted by fear. And slowly, something settles in your bones. You are not mean. You are clear. You are not distant. You are safe. You are not selfish. You are free. Chapter recap. Boundaries quiet the nervous system and make room for peace. Freedom is found in the daily practice of clarity, with yourself and with others. You no longer confuse chaos with love. You no longer apologize for being whole. This is what it looks like to live on your own terms. With truth. With courage. With calm strength. Reflection prompts. If you're listening while busy, let these questions rest. You can return to them later. What do you no longer feel responsible for, and how has that lifted you? In what area of your life are you finally living freely? What situations once stole your peace that no longer have that power? Who in your life has benefited because you chose to set boundaries? This is not the end of the work. But it is the beginning of a different way of living. Clear. Calm. Free. Epilogue. The boundaries were never just about them. Maybe you picked up this book because you were tired. Tired of bending. Tired of breaking. Tired of carrying peace on your back while your own soul went unheard. Maybe it started as a whisper, this isn't who I am anymore. And now, here you are. Still standing. More honest. More rooted. More you. You didn't just set boundaries. You reclaimed your identity. You didn't write people off. You wrote yourself back in. You didn't close your heart. You closed the door on dysfunction. You didn't become cold. You became clear. And that difference matters. And yes, you lost some things. Some people didn't understand the new you. Some relationships could not survive your clarity. Some roles you once played became too small to fit into again. That grief is real. But so is your freedom. The shift that changed everything. Boundaries were never about control. They were about alignment. They brought your life back into tune with your values. You learned to speak without fear. To say no without guilt. To love without losing yourself. You stopped living a life that drained you. You started living one that fits you. A final note on healing. Boundary work is not just behavioral. It is biological. It is nervous system work. When you stop betraying yourself, your body exhales. Your mind settles. Your chest feels lighter. So if you feel calmer, clearer, less anxious, that is not coincidence. That is healing. If you ever doubt yourself. When someone says, "You've changed," smile. They're right. You're no longer on sale. You're no longer available for chaos. You're not hard. You're whole. And that was the point all along. One last reminder. You don't need a crisis to honor your limits. You don't need permission to protect your peace. You don't need to explain your clarity. You just need to keep walking. One honest boundary at a time. Endorsements. Here are a few voices from readers and professionals who engaged deeply with this work. This book spoke to places in me I had not yet named. It helped me understand why overgiving so often leads to exhaustion and quiet resentment. The clarity it brings is both confronting and healing. It is not just informative, it is deeply human. Dominica Nyambu, Chief Magistrate, Kenya. This book reminds us that honesty is not rebellion, it is freedom. It shows that boundaries are not walls, but pathways to peace. Reading it challenges you to stop abandoning yourself for acceptance and to live with dignity and clarity. Isabel Njeru, Real Estate Valuation and Agency Consultant.